Hello, everyone, friends, and dear colleagues. I would first like to take this opportunity to thank the principal and the Department of English and all other concerned authorities for inviting me to participate in this MOOC-based lecture leading on to the faculty development program of the college, initiated by the college because it gives me an opportunity to get back to my alma mater in Delhi University, and it has been a great opportunity for a reconnection because I have been studying there for a very long time, for more than a decade. So it really feels great to be back over here. Thank you for that opportunity. Uh, as you already know, the thing that we are going to talk about is the language, culture, as a form, a sign, and a structure. Now, I think it's quite obvious from the title that I have given that it is going to be largely theoretical deliberation with a distinct formalist and semiotic bias. But what we will try to do is to take the accepted texts of Western semiotics, some very old and traditional, and some very new developments, and also try to put vis-a-vis some classical Indian philosophical texts on the philosophy of language, dealing with elements of science, structure, and semantics about meaning making. So we will just try and put them in play with each other. And finally, the question that we would like to arrive at is one, can culture be thought of as a language? And if it can be thought of so, how can we take the meaning out of it? How does it means what it tries to mean? One. And the second point, of course, is what is the exact nature of poetic language? So these are the two strains that will run continuously through whatever I have to say uh, in, that is distributed over the three modules that I have to present. The first module is devoted largely on formalist thought and develops on the idea of Roman Jakobson. Some of the things that we are going to talk about are very basic, but we need to clear them out for us to develop on this model at a later stage. Right now, Roman Jakobson, as many of us know, was a famous linguist who worked with the futurists, who later came to be known as the formalists, Russian formalists sometimes, and who worked from Moscow in 1920 amidst much opposition, one must say. So at one point of time, he really had to leave Moscow and moved to Prague, where he created the Prague Linguistic Society, drawing about a group of intellectuals around him. And then finally, he moved on to the United States, where he got a position of a professor of Slavic studies, and where he was able to finally bring all his knowledge of phonology, linguistics, phonetics together and develop his thesis. Some very important parts of his thesis, like distinctive features, the functions of language, and many other things that we generally associate Jacobson with as a forerunner of later day semiotic and formalist thoughts. So we will just go through some of these ideas that Jacobson presented us, and many of them will be very familiar ideas, but we need to put them out right at the beginning because otherwise it will be difficult for us to develop what we have to say, right? Now, the main thing that on which Jacobson's theory largely bases is to consider language as communication. All language is communication at one point of time. And of course, the question that we are going to ask is that can we, in some way, uh, broaden this concept to look at culture, cultural artifacts as a kind of communication? Uh, can we somehow metonymically extend language as communication to include that all culture is communication because the same model that we apply for language applies for culture too. So this is some of the question that we will try to resolve or arrive at some kind of a resolution at in the first module. This is what we will try to do. Now, what Jacobson gives us is a model that we call the primary model of communication. It is the most basic element, no matter how complicated communication is, no matter how difficult communication is. The fact is that all living beings engage in communication that operates through signs, a series of signs, a structure of signs. From the very smallest unicellular animal, whether it is a protozoa or an amoeba, just think of it moving inside the water and reading its surroundings and taking in signs of sometime danger and sometime food and sometime matter of attraction or repulsion. It is reading the signs continuously and it is reacting in some way or another way to that particular stimuli, the stimulus that is coming to it in the form of sign, to what we call the most abstruse philosophical ideas which are making use of language, which we know is the science system par excellence. We are all engaging in science. Living beings at whatever gradation in evolution whatsoever are engaging in science. Okay. And therefore communicating. It is through science that it is trying to make a sense of its universe, and for higher animals which may have some degree of predicative reasoning, trying to make sense of itself at the same time, and communicating at different levels, communicating with its surrounding, communicating amongst themselves, interspecies communication, communication within oneself. What is the basic notion of this communication is something that Jacobson gives us in the form of a model. And it is this model that we will be talking about in the beginning. So I will just have a few slides to share with you, which will help us, which is not bad at all, because the formalists did engage in plenty of science and stuff. This is it, and we go to the first slide actually. Now, if we take at the slide that is presently uh, on your screen, this is the basic format that we generally call Jacobson's communication circuit. As you know, that what a communication needs primarily is a message. A message. A message is a unit of meaningful information that is moving from a source point to an end point, a target point. And the source point is the point of the addressor, and from that particular point, it is moving to the end point, which is the addressing. So these are the first three factors in communication. We need a message, we need an addressor, and we need an addressee. However, there is a fourth factor too, which tells us that both the addressor and the addressee needs to be in understanding of a code within which the message will operate, because the message cannot move by itself. It needs a code, it has to be encoded, and both the addresser and the addressee needs to be in some kind of a mutual agreement about the code. Otherwise, there will be an obstruction, an impediment in the communication. If I if I speak a code to which you are not familiar, then it will be impossible for us to communicate. So we have a fourth factor that is coming in, which is the code. So we have the addresser, the addressee, the message, and the code. However, there is a fifth function that is also necessary, which is a point of contact between the addresser and the addressee. So both the addresser and the addressee needs to be in contact with one another. In some kind of contact is necessary. Some kind of contact. It can be a direct contact, face-to-face, real communication, where it can be tactile communication through some kind of, it can be a gestural communication, which will be visually understood by the other party. But there has to be some kind, for example, now that I'm speaking and you're listening to me without actually meeting, has this online platform as the point of contact, right? So there has to be some kind of a contact point which will bring the addresser and the addressee in a commonly understood and agreed upon code to come in communication with one another. However, there is another very important thing that is necessary. It needs a context. This entire process of the addresser and the addressee sharing a message in an understood code, coming into contact with one another, has to operate within an overarching context that will provide meaning to this entire communication, right? So, if we take a look at the model that is there, we find that the addresser here and the message is moving. The message is moving from the addresser to the addressee through this point of contact. However, the message can also return from the addressee to the addresser when again the role will change. The addressee will become the addresser and the addresser will become the addressee. And it has to take place within a code and everything will be within an overarching context. So these are the six factors of communication that Jacobson gives us. So if we take a look at the various factors of communication that we have the message, we have the addresser, we have the addressee, we have the code, the contact, and the context. So these are the six factors of communication according to Jacobson, without which no communication is possible. However, if we take a look back at the model that I just delivered, we can immediately understand that this is a very inadequate kind of a model because it kind of almost tries to say, although it doesn't say so explicitly, that the message will move from the addressee to the addressee in its own economy. It is like taking a jug of water and pouring it in an empty cup. So the message will move completely from the addressee to the addressee. However, we know that that is not how social interactions and communications take place, except maybe some very basic communication. And even then, that is more layered and nuanced. Even when I ask someone whom I don't know, meeting for the first time, that person's name, uh, even then, I am not really bereft of pre existing notions about identity when I am receiving that particular name. So, there are many things that come into factor. However, it is also true that without this basic model, we will not be able to develop anything above it. So we need the basic model first, and then we will take a look at the complications. So we will, if you take a look at the factors once more that I just presented, we need to problematize this particular model of communication by stating that the message that we have over here, it keeps changing its focal point. It starts bonding with one of the other factors to perform different functions within language. Now, this is the great discovery of Jacobson in terms of communication when he states that just as the message keeps changing its focal points, its focus areas within communication with the other factor, it gets into bonding with one or more of the other factors to create a particular kind of communication. So if we take a look at how it happens, so it will appear something like this. So when the message is collaborating or creating with the context, then it performs a referential function. So that is the first function of Jacobson, the most basic kind of function that we will later know that Yuri Lotman would call natural communication when it is referential. For example, when we are referring to the context, like it is raining outside, just as I speak to you, it is raining outside. So that is a referential function. When the message is bonded with the addressor, we have emotive function. For example, I can't believe it. What? Wow, that's good. I speak for myself. So whenever I emote myself as the addressor, then language performs an emotive function, the second function of communication. But when this message bonds itself with addressee as the target area, then it performs what we call the conative function. A conative function would just invert it and make the addressor, the addressee, the focal point. For example, what is your name? Shut the door. Give me the book. Tell me, O Lord, when when I'm urging the other person, when the message is for the other person to act upon, then we have the conative function of language. When it is attached to existing code, then it performs a meta-linguistic function. For example, what is when I say that what I'm saying is this, and then say something, then I'm using a message to refer to a message. For example, when I say that the course, the structure of this particular FDP dictates that we should stick to 30 minutes in each of the module, I am performing a metalinguistic function because I am referring to something that has already been referred. The weather report of today states that the weather will be cloudy. So just as I say the weather will be cloudy, I am also referring to the particular message that is actually saying this. So this is a metalinguistic function. And then finally, we have a function with which we will come back to again and again, which is the poetic function, when the message is actually bonded with the message. Now, it is with the six main functions that this entire world of human communication is organized. And poetic function, we will see, actually is a combination of the remaining functions and actually functions by disguising one communication in the form of other communication. We will try and do a few poetry analysis later on using this communication model and see how this can be applied to actual analysis of cultural texts. But before we get to that, we need to speak about another very important thing from a structural point of view, which states that whenever one of these functions are taking place, it also means that the other functions are not taking place. Or when one or more function is taking place, it also means that there are a group of functions which are not taking place. So it is as much as the presence of a particular function that is determining the communicative function of that particular moment, as much as the absence of the other functions at that given point of time if the communication is taking place. One of Jacobson's great contribution, perhaps philosophically speaking, his greatest contribution, and he was also himself very proud of it because he put it right in the very first volume of his collected works that we have, is this idea of distinctive features. Now, it is largely a phonological, phonetic kind of an idea, but we will not get into the details of it. It's very nuanced and complicated and gets into the extreme depths of phonetic analysis, but it is important for us to know the general principle of distinctive features because this is something that we will later expand in our general understanding of language and culture. So we will just, keeping these functions of communication in mind, we will just move to another related aspects of Jacobson's thinking, which is a distinctive feature. Now, when we all know that the sound that we are making, which is made of various small units, which are called phonemes, but uh, what Jacobson states, and he is not really a pioneer, this work was going on in Prague Linguistic Society already with the help of other scholars, were identifying phonological units even smaller than phoneme, even smaller than phoneme. And there were 13 phonological aspects which were isolated. And what Jacobson says summarily is that when we make two very similar, similar sounds, b and p, then what is it that distinguishes these two sounds? And Jacobson would tell us that uh, among the 13 phonological possibilities through which we can make sounds, the human mouth sound producing mechanism can make sound, the presence or absence of one can determine the phoneme. So even if all the 12 factors are the same, the presence or absence of the 13th factor can actually separate the sound, differentiate between b and a p, a k and a k and a p. And from this, Jacobson gives us the model of even the smallest sound by placing it on a binary principle. Says that even the smallest sound unit is constructed by a simultaneous presence and absence of what it is and what it is not. This then is the distinctive feature of language. Distinctive feature of language is the simultaneous presence of a certain set of phonological principles and the absence of certain phonological principles leading up to a phoneme, leading up to a phoneme. So this ambulance sound is the background, is right, somewhat grim reminder of the troubled times that we are going through. So kindly excuse me for that. Uh, my place is somewhat close to the road with the hospital nearby. So these phonemes disturbing all the time sometimes. Sorry for that. So we will continue. Now we know that this is very similar. The distinctive feature principle that Jacobson gives us is very similar to the semantic model that we have. How we make meaning from a word or a sentence. So meaning likewise, if we take a look, is made along two axes. There is, as it is written here, it has a metaphoric axis, which is its paradigmatic axis, the axis of difference, and there is a syntagmatic axis, which is the metonymic axis, which is the axis of structure. Now, both structure and difference makes a sentence meaningful. So we find that the binary that Jacobson was talking about reappear in semantics. Let us say, for example, we take a sentence like the cow eats grass. Okay, it's a classical sentence that is taken from Indian classical semantic understanding by the philosophers that uh, the cow eats grass. Now, this sentence is meaningful because the word cow is there and it is creating, if we can call it, a syntagmatic relationship with the grass. So if I say that the cow gives milk, then it means differently because there is a change that is operating on the syntagmatic axis. And at the same time, in the paradigmatic axis, which is the axis of difference, this word is meaningful because the word cow is used instead of any other animal or any other, yes, any other animal. Of course, you can say that the goat eats grass is also meaningful, but that's a different meaning altogether. Uh, so what I'm trying to get at is that a sentence is meaningful because some words are present, creating a relationship between them, and similarly, many words are absent. So it is as much as the syntagmatic presence, the metonymic presence of these words that make the meaning, as much as the metaphoric absence of other words that is making the meaning. And Jacobson would say this is obvious because that is the principle that informs even the smallest human sound. So it is no wonder that it will inform the entire range of sentence meaning as well. So we come to an understanding that it is both the absence and the presence of the syntagmatic and the paradigmatic axis that gives a particular moment, a particular utterance, its meaning. This is a great tool, really, in understanding cultural artifacts. If we get to some of it, you can apply it in many places. Advertisement, I think is a great site for understanding these things. Because, say, if I say a particular brand of toothpaste, so the moment it is trying to make some meaning out of this particular its utterance, it is at the same time creating a structure, creating a position with all the other facilities that it provide. And at the other sometime it is some at the same time it is also positioning itself. This is a very simple example taken from the popular oeuvre of culture. This can be used at great depth too, and it can be seen that almost all cultural utterances are actually made on the one hand through a kind of metonymic relationship with all other cultural products, artifacts around it, and at the same time it is positioning itself in opposition to, in the absence of many other cultural artifacts too. So both what is present and what is absent, both what is metonymically there and metaphorically not there, is giving meaning to that particular utterance. So this is largely what we will try and understand in this module. The last thing that we will do before we end this is that we will try and read a particular poem, first part of it, by using the communication structure of Jacobson. And this is a poem that many is familiar with. It's Mrityu, Kavi, Mrityu or Kavi. This is a poem by Mukti Bodh from very influential compilation of 1943, Tar Sapne Ke Kavitaएं. I have chosen this because I thought that it will create a resonance with many of my audiences, although I am myself not a scholar of Hindi literature much. Uh, but I think this is so famous, this is so well known, this is so influential, and this is so absolutely sparkingly beautiful that it's a great instance. And more importantly, it also gives us a nice example to understand that what we have been trying to do. Uh, the Hindi portion is given on the left. And to the right, I have tried to make a very literal translation without attempting at any kind of poetry at all, almost following a back translation methodology, so that it gives us, in its very rudiment, what we are trying to get at the communication. Now, if we take a look at the first line, we will see it says, just excuse my Hindi pronunciation, which is not the best, but it still helps. It says, Ghani Raat, Badal Rimchim Hai, Dishamu, Nistabd Vanantar. What is happening over here? We say that there are four elements. There are four what we shall say syntactic elements that are coming, as well as four semantic units that are being played together. It talks of a deep night. It says that it is raining. It says that there is silence in everywhere. Every direction rather is silent, and the wilderness is quiet too. However, what immediately strikes us is the conscious violence on grammar. These are not complete grammatical sentences except Badali Rimchim Hai. Now, it is purely this violence on the grammar, the syntactic violence on the change in the syntax, the enforcing of the syntax to meet the desired end, that is establishing it as a poetic language. The message here is saying that look at the message itself before jumping to the context or the reference. This is something that the formalists we all know called a process of defamiliarization. But if we kind of get a little more into in this individual unit analysis, we will see that that most of them have a noun and a describing adjective. So all of them are noun phrases without the application of a verb phrase, which is precisely where the violence on the syntax is coming. However, if we come to the second unit, Badal Rimchim Hai, we will find that there is a metalinguistic element that is coming in, because the word Rimchim, to signify the rain or as a sound of the rain, is a cultural trope that the poet is almost quoting. It appears like a referential function that is being carried on here. However, with the application of two devices, first, the breaking up of the syntax by omitting the verb phrase, and two, the intrusion of the metalinguistic function in the second unit, the poet has created a de-doublement. He has created a defamiliarization of the language through which he is not allowing us any direct movement to the meaning of it. It is taking the guise of a differential function, but it is actually performing a poetic function because it has stylistically put a metalinguistic element of communication within something that is otherwise a referential piece of communication. This is what I was saying when I meant that poetic function, apart from being an individual function in itself, is actually a problematizing of the remaining five functions by putting something in the guise of another. We will remember this because when we come back to the Indian classical idea of poetic language, the philosophy of poetic language, we will find that something very similar is being hinted at by the grammarians and the rhetoricians. Yes, right. And we can just go on. I will not go through the entire. You can. It's not very tough, and many of you are excellent scholars of Hindi literature, and you will be able to do this work better than me. So, but I have just given you a certain hint as to how we can use the theory of communication that Jacobson gives us in analyzing poetry. At the same time, before I complete, we can see that one of the reasons this is happening is that there is a kind of internal structure that is going on, which is the four syllables of the first unit, Ganira, is being mirrored by the third unit of Dishamuk, and Badal Rimchim Hai, the number of syllables is again being reflected by Nistar Vanantar, which is the second and the fourth. So there is a kind of internal mirroring that is going on within the line, which is actually formally creating a poetic line within this. And if we extend it, we will find that this is happening within the poetry as well. It's a close reading kind of a methodology. Of course, not close reading to an extent as this famous joke that Jacobson tells us of this famous linguist who was phonologically analyzing the text of a famous Slavic theologian, in fact, from theologian from the Middle Ages, and after going through his entire tome and the entire book that he has written, which is very thick with plenty of words, he has meticulously phonologically divided everything. So finally, someone asks him, "But what does he say in this book?" And he answers that, "Oh, that I haven't seen." So regarding the content, there was not much of a point. So we will not go to that extreme, but we will try and understand that apart from the philosophy that is there in this poem, which is excellent in its own way, its semantic meaning, but what we will also try and understand, and which is an important part of poetic analysis, are these kind of communicative phonological devices that are employed again and again analyze poetry, the kind of the formalist method. What we have seen is to take these words and go into real hair splitting in understanding that how this communicatively what devices are being used in analyzing poetry. I will just see how much time I have left, and if I don't have much, then I will. Okay, so I will just share another example with you, and that I think, and with that we can come to a conclusion. Right. This is lots of this can be done actually with this great wealth of spiritual poem, and this is a poem. This is a vachan actually. It's Ramanujan, Sekar Ramanujan's translation of a Basavanna Vachana, which is a form of devotional literature of the Veera Shaiva mystics from medieval times, and Basavanna being one of the premier ones of them. And it says that, "Look, the world in a swell of waves is beating upon my face. Why should it rise to my heart? Tell me. Oh, tell me, why is it rising now to my throat? Lord, how can I tell you anything when it is risen high over my head? Lord, Lord, listen to my cries. Oh, Lord of the meeting rivers, listen." Lord of the meeting rivers is Ramanujan's translation of Kudala Sangama, who is the deity, the Ishta Vasavanna. Here also we find something very similar going on. It has a kind of connective touch to it, but then it kind of reflects back. We will come back to this poem after we complete the second module, and we really try to understand a little more about poetic language from a communicational point of view. So thank you very much. That is the end of this module, and we will move to the next module.